The first thing people noticed about Daniel Hart was that he listened more than he spoke. He worked at a small post office in a quiet American town where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. The kind of town where days passed slowly, where people waved at each other without thinking, and where memories settled into the walls like dust that was never fully cleaned. Daniel had lived there almost his entire life, and in many ways the town had shaped him into who he was: careful, polite, and deeply afraid of making mistakes that could not be undone. Every morning, Daniel arrived at the post office before sunrise. He liked the silence, the smell of paper and ink, and the simple comfort of routine. Letters came in bundles, sorted by hand, each envelope carrying a piece of someone's life. Love letters, apologies, final goodbyes, confessions that would never be spoken aloud. Daniel never opened them, of course. He respected the privacy of strangers. But sometimes, holding a letter, he could feel its weight, not physical weight, but emotional. Some envelopes felt heavier than others. There was one letter, however, that changed everything. It arrived on a cold morning in late autumn. The trees outside had already lost most of their leaves, and the sky was a pale gray that made the world feel unfinished. Daniel noticed the letter immediately because it had no return address. The handwriting was careful but slightly uneven, as if the writer's hand had hesitated with every word. The envelope was addressed to him. Daniel Hart, 27 Willow Lane. He frowned. It was rare, almost unheard of, for someone to send him a personal letter. He stood there for a moment, staring at his own name, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. Something about it made him uneasy, like a memory trying to surface but stopping just short of recognition. He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket, telling himself he would open it later at home when the day was done. But he didn't. That evening, Daniel returned to his small house on Willow Lane. It was a modest place, quiet and clean, filled with furniture that had not been changed in years. He cooked a simple dinner, ate alone, and turned on the television for background noise. The letter remained in his jacket, forgotten as life continued in its usual predictable rhythm. Days passed. The letter stayed unopened. Daniel told himself it wasn't important. If it were urgent, the sender would have made it clear. Still, every night as he lay in bed, a faint sense of guilt settled over him, not strong enough to force action but persistent enough to be noticed. He wondered who had sent it: an old friend, a mistake, someone from a life he no longer lived. He never allowed himself to wonder too deeply. Weeks turned into months. Winter arrived, quiet and heavy. Snow covered the town, softening its edges. The letter was placed in a drawer with old bills and expired documents. Slowly, almost deliberately, Daniel forgot about it. Until the woman appeared. She came into the post office on a Tuesday afternoon when the building was nearly empty. Daniel noticed her immediately, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she looked out of place. She wore a dark coat that seemed too thin for the season, and her hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a face marked by exhaustion rather than age. She approached the counter and waited. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. Her eyes were sharp, searching, as if comparing him to a memory. "My name is Reed," she said. "I'm looking for a letter." Daniel's hands paused mid-motion. "Do you have a tracking number?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think it ever reached where it was supposed to go." Something about her voice made Daniel uncomfortable. Not angry, not accusing, just tired, deeply tired. "When was it sent?" he asked. "Last autumn," she replied. "About 6 months ago." Daniel swallowed. "And who was it addressed to?" he asked, already fearing the answer. She met his eyes. You. The silence between them stretched, thin and fragile. I don't remember, Daniel said, and immediately hated how weak it sounded. I know, Elena replied, that's why I'm here. She explained slowly. She was Daniel's former neighbor from many years ago, from a time Daniel rarely thought about anymore. A time before routines and quiet nights. A time when he had made a decision that changed the direction of his life. Eleanor's younger sister Clara had written the letter. She died 3 weeks ago, Eleanor said quietly. The words landed with a dull heaviness. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. She waited for a reply, Eleanor continued. For months, every day she asked if the mail had come. Every day she believed you would answer. Daniel's thoughts raced. Memories began to surface, summer evenings, shared laughter, a promise made without understanding its weight. Clara, he remembered her smile, her voice, the way she had looked at him the night he left town without saying goodbye. I didn't know, Daniel whispered. That doesn't change what happened, Eleanor said. Her voice did not rise, that made it worse. Daniel nodded slowly. I still have the letter. Eleanor's eyes flickered with something, relief maybe or pain. Then you should read it. That night Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table. The house felt different now, smaller, heavier. He opened the drawer and took out the envelope. It looked older than it should have, as if time had aged it faster than everything else. His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter inside was written in simple language. No dramatic words, no accusations, just honesty. Clara wrote about the life she had lived since he left, about mistakes, about forgiveness, about how she never stopped believing that people could return even after they walked away. She wrote that she wasn't asking for love, only understanding, only one honest conversation before time ran out. The final line stopped Daniel's breath. If you are reading this, then maybe I was right to hope. If you are not, then I forgive you anyway. Daniel folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. For the first time in years he cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, broken way that felt long overdue. The next morning he returned to the post office early, but routine no longer comforted him. He realized something painful and simple. Ignoring a letter had not protected him from pain. It had only delayed it, making it heavier when it finally arrived. He found Eleanor waiting outside when he left work that day. I read it, he said. She nodded, good. I'm sorry, Daniel added. I should have answered, I should have tried. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Some letters, she said, are not meant to be answered with words. They are meant to change the person who reads them. Daniel watched her walk away, knowing she was right. The letter could not bring Clara back, but it had opened something inside him that had been closed for too long. That night, Daniel sat at his desk and began to write. Not a reply, but a promise. Daniel did not sleep that night. The letter lay folded beside him on the desk, but its words felt carved into his thoughts. Every sentence replayed in his mind, not as ink on paper, but as moments he had ignored, chances he had delayed, and emotions he had buried under years of silence. He realized something uncomfortable. The letter had not arrived late. He had been late to it. In the days that followed, Daniel began to notice changes in himself, small at first. He started walking slower, listening more closely when people spoke. At the post office, he found himself looking at each envelope differently, no longer as an object to be sorted, but as a fragile container of time. He understood now that a letter was not just a message. It was a moment asking to be met. One afternoon, while organizing old records, Daniel discovered something unexpected. A small stack of letters had been misfiled years ago, pushed to the back of a metal cabinet. Most were unimportant advertisements, late notices, forgotten mail, but one envelope stopped him cold. It was another letter from Clara. This one was never sent. The envelope was unsealed, the paper inside slightly creased. His name was written again in the same careful handwriting. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He hesitated, then unfolded it. Clara wrote about fear, about how writing the first letter had taken more courage than she expected. She admitted she almost never sent it, worried that reopening the past would hurt more than silence. She wrote that if Daniel never replied, she would still choose to believe that reaching out had mattered, that speaking, even into emptiness, was better than staying silent forever. At the bottom of the page there was a date. It was written 2 days after the first letter had arrived at the post office. Daniel closed his eyes. If he had opened the first letter on time, he would have known she was still waiting, still alive, still hopping. The realization hit him harder than grief. It was regret sharpened by clarity. That evening, Daniel did something he had avoided for most of his adult life. He drove out of town. The road stretched long and quiet, bordered by fields and fading light. Clara had lived in a small house near the edge of the county, a place Daniel remembered well. When he arrived, the house was empty, the windows dark. A for sale sign leaned slightly in the yard. But the porch light was on. Eleanor opened the door before he could knock. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. They sat inside, surrounded by boxes and half-packed memories. Eleanor listened as Daniel spoke, not quickly, not dramatically, but honestly. He told her about the second letter, about the regret, about the realization that doing nothing had been a choice even if he hadn't meant it to be. "I can't change what happened," Daniel said, "but I don't want to live like that anymore." Eleanor studied him carefully. Clara didn't want guilt, she said. She wanted truth and action. Daniel nodded. "Then tell me what to do." Eleanor thought for a moment. Then she stood and handed him a small notebook. She wrote when she couldn't sleep, Eleanor said. Stories, thoughts, letters she never sent. She wanted people to learn from them one day. Daniel opened the notebook. Inside were short reflections written simply about kindness, about waiting too long, about speaking while there was still time. That night, Daniel made a decision that frightened him more than regret ever had. He quit his job. The town was shocked. The post office had been his identity for decades, but Daniel knew something had shifted. He no longer wanted to handle letters without honoring what they meant. With Eleanor's permission, Daniel began to share Clara's words. He started small, a community board, a local reading night, then a simple online page where he read letters aloud, anonymous, respectful, human. People listened, they cried, they wrote back. Letters arrived from strangers who had waited too long to speak, from people holding apologies they were afraid to send, from those who feared it was already too late. Daniel answered everyone. Months later, Daniel returned to the post office not as an employee but as a visitor. He mailed a single letter addressed not to a person but to a place. To the past. Inside he wrote only one sentence. "I am listening now." He walked out into the sunlight feeling lighter than he had in years, not because he had been forgiven, but because he had finally chosen to respond. Some letters change lives not when they are written, but when they are finally read. And some lessons arrive too late to save the past, but just in time to save the future.